Hello, my name's Lee Jarvis. I'm a professor of international politics at the University of East Anglia in the United Kingdom.
And I'm Nick Robinson, Associate Professor of Politics and International Studies at the University of Leeds, also in the United Kingdom.
And we're here to talk to you about our new article, just been published with the Review of International Studies. Oh help, oh no, the international politics of the Gruffalo, children's picture books and world politics. We thought a nice place to start might be by saying a little bit about why we think children's picture books are important, why they matter for people like us that are interested in global politics. So, Nick, I wondered if you had any thoughts.
Yeah, well, I mean, instinctively, I think a lot of people watching this video might think these are fairly trivial things, right? We just read them as our kids are going to bed. The point that we want to emphasize, though, however, is that the world is presented to us increasingly in highly visual forms. Obviously, children's picture books are highly visual. So if we imagine all kinds of issues that are framed to us, whether it be migration, the environment, 9/11, for example, all of these are highly visual things. Also, of course, politics is often negotiated and talked to us in our everyday. And we do that as kids go to bed. You know, these books provoke and invoke thinking. They're read in huge numbers. It's almost inconceivable that anyone watching this video would have sat down with their children routinely and read a children's picture book. And these engage with the most extraordinarily important issues, often things like the environment, gender identities are often invoked and talked about in these picture books. And in particular, in this one, it has a lot to say, we would argue, about security. And it makes security meaningful to young children and adults in a kind of really interesting and negotiated way.
I think that's right. I think and not only interesting and negotiated, but also in a really complex way. And one of the arguments that we try to make in the paper is how it tells us perhaps more than one story about security, which we could perhaps come on. I think that point about the everydayness of text like the Gruffalo is really important. I've got my copy right here. It's well thumbed. Well, I say my copy. It's probably give it back to my children at some point after we've done this. But these texts are such a prominent part of our everyday life, and what we try to do is to argue, I think, that they're vitally important in shaping the world itself, but also our knowledge thereof, and that becomes even more pronounced if we're thinking about the sorts of readerships that they're aimed at young children in particular. I wondered if, Nick, if you thought there was anything, how children's literature, how children's picture books like the Gruffalo fit within a wider argument or wider ecosystem of popular culture.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting point. I mean, it's fair to say there's a pretty big growing subfield now of literature on popular culture and world politics. And, you know, again, it's often motivated, I guess, by the sheer scale of these things. I mean, we're now increasingly aware that we're being exposed to important ideas, things like the usage of torture in a TV series, and that those ideas that we're being exposed to are meaningful to people. But the one thing that we never talk about, amazingly, is children's picture books. And given the age profile, you know, kids are particularly susceptible and imaginative and creative, yet we've never really looked at them, which is a bizarre thing, actually, given how much we talk about these other spaces of pop culture.
Yeah, and particularly something like the Gruffalo, if you look at almost any indicator of commercial success or critical success, it's astonishing, right? Yeah. In terms Absolutely. Of the sales, the prizes it's won, the commercial spin-offs. I've been to see the theatrical productions of the Gruffalo. I've been on Gruffalo walks through forests. I've watched the films. It's just an incredible, has an incredible place in the world and in the lives of people with young children. I think that's really important and interesting that hasn't been taken more seriously within disciplines like international relations to date.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I suppose, to be honest, it seems to me, Lee, a bit symptomatic of the ignoring of children full stop, right? I mean, one of the things, and there are some important scholars who keep alerting us to this fact, and again, we deal with that in the article, right? But it's just a general surfeit, really, of engagement with children. They're often seen as passive, as lacking agency. And what's becoming really, really clear now with things like the climate protesting is that children are really, really important to world politics. And this is, again, I think, another reason to focus in on these books, right? Because it brings children right to the heart of the story that we want to tell about international relations. I just want to ask you, if I can do, Lee, a little bit about the methods, because obviously what we're really hoping, of course, is that other people might be inspired to do similar work to this, right? So can you want to say a little bit about about what we did when we engaged with the book?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So I guess what we try to do is to sketch out what we call a composite methodological framework for engaging with really vibrant and complex texts like the Gruffalo. And what we do is we try to proceed through a reading that takes place essentially in 4 stages. So we begin by situating the book socially, politically, speaking there a little bit about interviews with Julia Donaldson and Axel Scheffler about their hopes, their intentions for the book, talking about its reception in different contexts, that kind of thing. And then we move to a sort of an effort to descriptively retell the story as it unfolds throughout the book, this story that is centered around this character of a mouse that journeys through a deep, dark wood, meeting various other inhabitants of the wood, and ultimately the Gruffalo, the titular character. The third stage of our method is then to spend a little time thinking about the presentation of the book, the kinds of images that we see here, Axel Scheffler's illustrations, what is given prominence in the visual narration of this story, how are particular characters visually rendered visible, if you like, how is the text presented on particular pages, how do things like font and guttering play into this experience that people have with this book in their front rooms, in their bedrooms, in their everyday lives, if you like. And then we bring that discussion, I guess, to a close with the fourth and the longest section of the article, which is to then try to theorize world politics through the Gruffalo, and to look to explore, I guess, 3 different ways in which the Gruffalo as a text offers an engagement with world politics. Does that sort of fit with your understanding of what we've done?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think just before I ask you specifically about that, about our reading, it's also really symptomatic, I think, of, again, both a gap that we expose with this article, but also of what a lot of other scholars in the field do. Actually, popular culture is an extraordinarily useful vehicle, actually, for provoking and or indeed invoking thinking about theory. And I think this book, which on the surface of it is quite a simple thing, right? Where really it's really surprising how much it provokes and invokes thinking about world politics. And in that sense of the word, you know, we're drawing, aren't we, on stuff like Michael Shapiro's work on the aesthetic subject, right, which we make use of and mobilize as part of our method, almost, to actually invoke and provoke thinking. So can I ask you now, Lee, specifically really about that, the reading that we offer? And again, I'm very minded that this is a bit like an Agatha Christie thing, or giving away all the best bits of the article. So hopefully people that will get to the end of it all. But anyway, if you want to sort of summarize what it is we found through that reading, that would be brilliant.
Sure. I mean, it's all thriller, isn't it? But I guess the argument we make the argument that there are 3 different engagements with global politics running through the Gruffalo, or at least 3 different engagements. The first is, we argue that it stories the world in a very familiar, very traditionally realist sense. It produces this sort of state of nature environment, the deep dark wood, that is populated by survival-seeking, self-interested actors, a mouse, a fox, a snake, an owl, Gruffalo, that are all that share nothing with one another. They're all sort of unitary actors that don't engage in any more meaningful way other than to attempt to sort of satisfy their own self-interests and material power. Material capabilities is a very sort of prominent theme that runs through that discussion. So that's the first story that we argue the Gruffalo tells, and that's probably the most obvious one that I think many readers come away from the book having internalized, although I'm making assumptions there, of course. Second thing that it does, we argue, is that the Gruffalo also disrupts that very stereotypically realist understanding of the world by pulling attention so beautifully to the ways in which security threats, dangers, challenges, and so forth are constructed, are produced by politically or discursively powerful actors, that a big sort of plot point in the story is the protagonist Mouse's ability to conjure up this image of a Gruffalo that, until the halfway point in the book, the mouse doesn't believe exists. And what the book does very nicely, I think, is to demonstrate how successfully security threats can be conjured up, can be created, and how the ideation or the discursive mediates the material world. And I think it's a really nice illustration of that. And then we argue finally that the book goes even further than that by demonstrating how stories of security and insecurity are always parochial. They're always the stories of someone. They're always produced by particular actors with particular interests, that you can't read the Gruffalo and escape from the character of Mouse. Mouse is visible on every page. Mouse is the character that drives the plot forward. Everything that happens is a result of Mouse's behavior. Mouse is a much more complexly sort of produced character than all the others in the book. And what we argue is that the book sort of really nicely demonstrates how knowledge of security is sort of deeply situated in that sense. Yeah,
I mean, it's really interesting, isn't it? And all those readings, of course, can be conducted simultaneously, and parts of them can come out in different kinds of ways. And I think that was the other thing. And actually, I remember we were discussing this because there were also a number of readings which we sort of mentioned in the footnotes that we just obviously could have also mounted that we didn't, for all kinds of, and partially, I guess, for reasons of space, right? That we just weren't, for example, able to undertake a gendered reading, for example, which could have worked extraordinarily well. I mean, the richness of it was just, I think it's fair to say, just in the process of us putting the article together, became stunningly clear to us. And I guess that just relates to the sort of final set of thoughts really about the article. It finishes up, doesn't it, with a sort of sense really of a whole bunch of potential future research enterprises. And I think we've really only just started to scratch the surface of this. And we really hope, I guess, our overall thinking is that it would be absolutely fantastic if other scholars in the discipline joined really a network, I guess, of people who started to interrogate and look at these things, because we think there's, these picture books are so important.